So, hi, it's currently 11:09 p.m. at night. I haven't done anything on this project, and I feel like now is probably the time to do it. So, it's time to log in. This project was assigned to me at the beginning of this school year, all the way back in August. Procrastination is often labeled as laziness, lack of discipline, or poor management. Yet, beneath the surface of delayed actions and last minute scrambling lies a more complex psychological reality. For many, including me, procrastination functions as a self defense mechanism, a subconscious strategy used to protect oneself from fear, anxiety, perfectionism, or emotional discomfort. First, defense mechanisms are unconscious strategies that individuals use to shield themselves from internal conflicts or external stress. Sigmund Freud first introduced this concept, and it has since evolved into a foundational theory in psychology. Similar to denial or repression, procrastination can serve to protect the ego from overwhelming emotions, particular fear of failure, self doubt, or the pressure of high expectations. As mentioned in an article by Psychology Today called Procrastination 101, a self protective mechanism. Procrastination is often a self protective mechanism that allows people to avoid perceived threats to their self worth or the fear of failure, particularly when facing challenging tasks. Additionally, the article mentions that procrastination can also be a form of protection from being controlled, such as delaying certain tasks to be completed on your own time, holding dearly into that sense of control within your own hands. Psychologists have long sought to clarify procrastination, and now they have revealed it as a behavior strategy to cope with discomfort. In the book Now Habit, written by Neil Fiore on addressing procrastination as root causes rather than just offering surface level time management tips, Neil Fiore introduces procrastination not as a laziness, but as a form of internal resistance, language that immediately shifts the tone from blame to empathy. Fiora describes how many individuals procrastinate not because they don't care, but they care too much. A task becomes a battleground for perfectionism, and delay becomes a way to avoid failure while maintaining the illusion of competence. This reframing, viewing procrastination as a way to protect oneself rather than a testament of one's idleness, lays the groundwork for a more compassionate dialogue with oneself. The perspective shared by Fiore demonstrates that the phrase used in the previously mentioned Psychology Today article, self protective mechanism, is not accidental. It mirrors the vocabulary of trauma, survival, and internal safety. Just as the body withdraws from a flame, the mind pulls away from perceived psychological danger. Procrastination, then, is not indifference, but emotional shielding. From my personal experiences, procrastination feels almost paralyzing. I feel incapable of starting my work no matter how hard I try. The lack of motivation drags one down like a weight. Few literature works capture the existential paralysis of procrastination like Fyodor Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, a psychological and philosophical monologue by a bitter, isolated man who rejects rationalism and exposes the contradictions of human nature. Through his self destructive thoughts and actions, the novel explores themes of free will, alienation, and rationality of existence. The narrator's famous indecision is not simply apathy, it is a kind of overactive consciousness turned inwards. A quote from the novel is, "To be overly conscious is a sickness, a real thorough sickness." His language reflects how procrastination becomes intellectualized anxiety, a defense against doing by dissolving in thought. The underground man doesn't complete actions, he lingers in narrative, rationalization, and delay. The story itself is fragmented and recursive, echoing the emotional loops of the procrastinator. The narrator's rhetorical questions, ironic tone, and metaphors of imprisonment mirrors the emotional landscapes of those who delay not because they're idle, but because doing anything is to risk everything. Its language is sharp, self-aware, and defensive, just like the psychological mechanisms modern researchers describe. Many contemporary psychologists emphasize the emotional roots of procrastination. McLean Hospital, a hospital in Massachusetts with one of the world's largest neuroscientific and psychiatric research programs, explained in an article called "Why You Put Things Off Until the Last Minute." Procrastination is a short-term relief mechanism, a phrase that invokes a soothing sensation, almost like a rub-on medicine, but for emotional pain. Language such as relief suggests that procrastination is an active method of emotional regulation. An article called Procrastination, Why We Do It and What It Says About Our Psyche by Health Potential even links it to frugal defense mechanisms like repression. Our minds push away difficult tasks to protect our egos from the wounds of failure and inadequacy. I experience this on a daily basis. I am a huge procrastinator, often starting assignments the day they're due at 2 a.m. or even sometimes 3, finishing sometimes like 3 to 4 hours later. The bigger the assignment, it seems, the more I procrastinate. For example, in sophomore year for AP Chem, I will start my assignments at around 1 a.m. and finish them roughly 3 to 4 hours later. This also happens with this assignment, of course, which I had the whole school to do, but only started the day before. On the surface, you can label me as a lazy and simply a bad student trying to avoid his work, but internally it was fear. Fear that what I wrote or I spoke wouldn't be good enough, that would fail to meet my own standards, my teachers, or even sometimes even other students' expectations. The language I use in my head, not ready yet, I'll do it when I feel more focused, I don't know what I'm doing, was not a product of idleness. It was coded instinct of emotional protection. Those thoughts acted as a kind of armor, shielding my fragile self-worth that was always afraid of failure. A lot of times, we respond to certain situations based on how they are described. Procrastination is often labeled as laziness or a lack of self-discipline. However, viewed through a linguistic and psychological lens, it's not a moral failing. It is a complex emotional defense. In works similar to Notes from Underground, we observe the tortured inner monologue of a man paralyzed by fear and self-awareness. In self-help texts like The Now Habit, we find language that empowers rather than shames. In our own lives, we use subtle linguistic cues, not yet, maybe tomorrow, sometimes later, to shield ourselves from risks. By paying attention to how we talk about procrastination, both internally and culturally, we can begin to transform it from a cycle of shame into a path of self-understanding. Then again, I'm just an overall lazy student that's trying to justify his own procrastination. I'm not defending procrastination. I don't believe that is a good habit to get into. It's definitely something that people need to get around. However, now both I and my fellow procrastinators have a bit more of a justification when we start our assignments at 4 in the morning. As the famous saying goes, sleep is temporary, transcripts and grades are internal. Just for a check-in, the video was finished at 3:04 a.m.